Hi, and welcome to this month's Armchair Samurai. I know we're only 3 videos in, but this time instead of fight versus fight, I'm going to be doing what I call fight commentary, which is where I will give my opinion on political or social issues related to the topics of fight culture, violence, martial arts, self-defense, that kind of thing. And as I said in last month's video, the Armchair Samurai playlist seems like the right place to put that kind of content on my channel. Next month, and for several months after that, I'll be back to the fight versus fight format and pitting 2 movie or TV fight scenes against each other. The overtly political content of this playlist will be kept to a minimum, and sometimes though, I'll just feel so strongly about a related issue that I feel I have to make a video on it, and that video will go on this playlist. You were warned. So thanks for watching, and now on with the show. So, I've been getting to know a new coworker. It's mostly been small talk about our favorite movies, our hobbies, our families, that kind of stuff. We get along pretty well so far, and I like them a lot. The other day, though, our conversation got a bit political, and it turned to the Me Too movement, and my coworker expressed delighted surprise to learn that I fully supported the Me Too movement along with other feminist causes. They said they were surprised because I don't, in their words, seem like the kind of guy who would be on board with that sort of thing. When I asked why I didn't seem like that to them, they said, well, you're a pretty masculine dude, and you love fighting. To which I responded, without even thinking, yes, but I hate violence. I love fighting, but I hate violence. Let's put a pin in that idea. Back in October of 2018, the UFC 229 event descended into chaos after Russian lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov submitted former lightweight champion, the Irishman Conor McGregor, in the 4th round of their fight. And like most UFC title matches, the promotional run-up to this event had been full of trash talk and insults between the opponents, especially from McGregor, who made a point of insulting Nurmagomedov's family and religion at every opportunity. The UFC fans ate this up, of course. At least the ones from America did. For them, it's all just a show. It's just pretense, an act to get the crowds riled up and enthusiastic about the upcoming match. Once the match is over, the 2 fighters are expected to forgive and forget all the insults because neither of them ever really meant it anyway. That's what the hugging out at the end of fights is all about. The fighters are presumed to have earned each other's respect, and so they're cool now. It's a consistent narrative sold by the UFC across all of their events and promotions. But that's not what happened here. Nurmagomedov took all of this personally. After winning his fight against McGregor, he climbed out of the octagon and attacked McGregor's teammates, and his team came into the octagon to attack McGregor himself as well. The cops had to break all of this up on live television. For Nurmagomedov, none of this was just for show. For him, this was a matter of personal and national honor. As a Russian of Dagestani origin, he comes from a culture that still treats questions of reputation and honor as matters of life and death in many cases. As recently as February of this year, Nurmagomedov's manager was saying that a rematch between him and McGregor would happen on the streets, and that McGregor had better increase his personal security. Now, you can condemn this attitude as unsportsmanlike and the behavior as criminally threatening, but there's no getting around the fact that McGregor's and the UFC's insensitivity to the cultural differences at play here were significant contributing factors. Even if you ignore McGregor's own criminal behavior towards Nurmagomedov in the run-up to their fight. Back in April of 2018, McGregor and about 30 of his mates attacked a bus carrying Nurmagomedov's team, with McGregor smashing a window by throwing a metal dolly. This incident resulted in several injuries, including to 2 fighters who had to be hospitalized and withdraw from their scheduled fights. McGregor turned himself into the police the next day, and he faced 3 felony charges of criminal mischief. But the brawl that followed this title fight was bigger than just McGregor's criminal buffoonery and Nurmagomedov's fixation on personal honor. It was a bitter fruit from a tree nurtured by the UFC in the soil of toxic masculine identity and trash-talking performative violence. Something like this was inevitable. And in fact, incidents like this occur at lower division MMA events all over the world quite often. And although this particular rivalry has continued to fester since their title fight, it's interesting to look at Nurmagomedov's public statement immediately after the brawl. After apologizing for his attack on McGregor's cornermen, Nurmagomedov still laid a lot of blame at McGregor's escalation tactics, and indirectly on the UFC's entire promotional paradigm. Nurmagomedov said, quote, "Media changed a little bit of MMA. It's a respect sport. This is not a trash-talking sport. This is respectful. I told you guys I want to change this game. I don't want people to talk shit about opponents, talk shit about father, like religion. You cannot talk about religion. You cannot talk about nation. For me, this is very important." Unquote. This is a respect sport, not a trash-talking sport. Let's put a pin in that idea too. Some of the guys I train with were frustrated by that Gillette ad that dropped a few weeks back. Especially the sequence showing an adult man breaking up a fight between 2 boys, telling them, "That's not how we treat each other, okay?" They found the ad frustrating because they felt that wrestling and rough play are an essential part of boyhood, and that Gillette was implying there's something inherently wrong with being male by showing this supposedly inherently male behavior as bad. But not all of my training friends felt this way. Some of us, including me, pointed out that the boy at the bottom didn't appear to be enjoying himself. The ad, therefore, was really a demonstration of a grown man modeling positive masculinity to the boys by teaching them a lesson about the difference between fighting and violence. The difference between fighting and violence, of course, is consent. You see, sparring, especially at full power and full resistance, doesn't really work unless all parties involved are communicating non-verbally about their limits and their boundaries, and respecting each other's limits and boundaries. Effective fighting is a very personal, very intimate encounter that requires a lot of empathy. All the fighters know that fighting comes with risks, and we have all consented to accept those risks in the interest of improving our performance or testing our own limits. Now, obviously, accidents happen, and fighting taps into a lot of instinctual human reactions that require discipline to keep in check. Since no one possesses perfect discipline all the time, there are going to be screw-ups. Every fighter gets this, and we try to be understanding and forgiving about it when it happens. That's part of why we shake hands or hug things out at the end. But sparring partners who regularly disregard other fighters' well-being and boundaries will quickly be taken out of rotation by the instructors. If necessary, they'll be sent home, or even asked never to return. Those of us who love fighting have, or should have, nurtured a visceral understanding of consent. We are taught never to use our skills on someone without their explicit permission. Unless we are acting in last resort self-defense, of course. Because when you remove the element of consent from fighting, it transforms into violence. And violence is one of the worst things that humans do to each other. When a person does not consent to being punched, or kicked, or grappled in a particular way with specific levels of force, their experience of being on the receiving end of those actions can be traumatizing, both physically and mentally. When that kind of physicality is used on someone against their will, it is clearly not being done in a spirit of mutual respect. Hitting someone or grappling someone who has not consented to it denies them the ability to set and maintain their personal boundaries. It robs them of agency. It is inherently disrespectful, demeaning, and oppressive. Hitting without consent is not fighting. It is violence. This is why I object to characterizing MMA and other combat sports as violent. The fighters involved have consented to the risks of the behavior. They are fighting in a spirit of respectful competition, at least in theory, if not always in practice. But I stopped following the UFC and most other MMA events a long time ago because I'm turned off by the rampant toxicity of the culture. But the toxicity isn't rooted in the fighting, and the fighting is not, in itself, toxic behavior. It's all the baggage that the UFC and its fans alike have imposed on the fighting. The trash talk that becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish from verbal abuse and bullying. The growing tendency to frame defeat as a permanent reflection of a fighter's character or human worth, rather than as simply a temporary circumstance. The indefensible tolerance and even celebration of violence perpetrated by athletes outside the octagon. The UFC did nothing to punish Conor McGregor after his attack on Nurmagomedov's bus, beyond issuing some press statements about how horrible it was. In fact, within a few weeks of those statements, UFC advertising for the upcoming bout was using footage of the attack as promotional material to sell their product. And that represents nothing less than an endorsement of McGregor's violence. Far from dishonoring the project of MMA in the eyes of fans, McGregor and the UFC gained social capital among fans because of his toxic behavior. It became, and remains, part of their larger brand of trash talk bullying embedded within the blindness to cultural nuances that led to Nurmagomedov's team treating this like a blood feud instead of a competition. The UFC and its fans are the barbecuing men in that Gillette ad, intoning their mantra of boys will be boys while they watch one kid bullying another. But they should be the dad who stepped up and separated the boys, teaching them about the importance of consent and respect, about the difference between fighting and violence. There is nothing inherently toxic about fighting. And there's nothing inherently male about it either. Fighting may be heavily male-coded in our culture, but it need not be. People of any gender can learn and benefit from fight training, and I always encourage everyone who asks me about it to try it out, especially those in marginalized populations who are more likely to be targets of violence than I am. But there's a problem there, too. A big one, and we're not going to put a pin in it. We're just going to dive right in. Most of the people I've trained with have been cisgendered men. And unlike some of my training partners who got upset at the Gillette ad, I don't think that's because people identified male at birth have some kind of gene or instinct that makes us more interested in fighting. We are, all of us, born into a gender ecology that shapes us and teaches us from the moment we take our first breath. The range of our expected and acceptable interests is imposed on all of us based on some interpretation of our chromosomes and genitalia. Those called boys, who will be presumed to be on a journey to become those called men, will be taught what their gender means. It means wearing pants, not skirts. It means never crying or asking for help. It means being strong. If someone hits you, you have to hit them back harder. Otherwise, you're a loser, a cuck, a beta, a soy boy, a whatever term is popular these days with internet tough guys. And fight training can definitely be a catalyst for all of this. You will almost certainly meet fighters whose primary motivation seems to be kicking other people's asses, who approach even sparring as a contest of egos where they have to hit hardest and be the winner. Now, I think this happens because those of us declared male and treated as male from birth have been taught that we are entitled to dominance. And when that dominance is challenged, it is experienced as an existential threat, as an attack on the very core of who we are. And almost the only way that we are culturally sanctioned to meet such a challenge is by lashing out with violence so that we can reestablish the lost dominance that we feel we are entitled to. Now, this violence need not always be physical, but in fight training, obviously, it usually is. And it manifests there in fight training as sloppy technique and an increased risk of injury, as the fighter loses sight of learning and focuses instead on winning, on hitting the other person as hard as they can. Beyond the ring or the dojo, in the larger culture, this attitude manifests in the wide and terrifying web of mass shootings, sexual assaults, hate crimes, riots, and higher male suicide rates, to name just a few of the many gendered tragedies facing us. All of which can mean that if you are not someone declared male and raised male from birth, stepping into a fight training environment can be terrifying. I mean, even if you are coded as male, it can be frightening. But for those of us not raised that way, I can only imagine that the challenge is even greater. It's possible that many of the fighters you meet will resemble the people who have directly abused and oppressed you. So it's not lost on me that most people I meet in fight training are cis men. But I have also been lucky enough to meet and train with people of other identities from time to time who have helped me discover that fight training can encourage other ways of doing masculinity. For cis men like me, it can be a tool for unlearning toxic masculine thought patterns we didn't even know we had. Once we get over the idea that being hit is an attack on our sense of self, or a challenge to our place in the gender hierarchy, once we get that being hit is just a tool for learning, we can take that lesson with us to life outside the training space. When the macho posturing starts at a bar or a concert, we can back away and leave without feeling diminished because we know that our masculinity is not at stake. If we're confronted about something we did wrong to a loved one, we can hear the critique and seek a path of healing and understanding without feeling the need to defend our ego. When we learn that our ego can actually be our enemy and how to get around it, we can be open to the world around us as it comes, rather than always seeking to control it or tame it. And yes, we can also learn how to break bones and choke people out if we have no other choice. But along with that comes the knowledge that most conflicts in life just aren't worth the risk that violence brings. So we can be more rather than less motivated to resolve conflicts nonviolently. To back down, buy the next round of drinks, offer to pay for the damages, break eye contact, take a moment to just breathe and center ourselves. those can be essential survival skills as well. The very first self-defense lesson I ever got was run away. The teacher actually encouraged me to train running sprints, and I have since found many other teachers who begin with the same lesson. It's often, and only half-jokingly, referred to as run foo. The second lesson I received, which took up most of my first lesson, was about de-escalation. We learned how to alter the tone of our voice, how to use body language to signal that we weren't a threat, how to be assertive in our language without being aggressive or abusive. And only from there did we learn how to stand, how to move, how to throw a punch, or how to escape a grapple. That was an eye-opening experience for me, because it was the first time in my life that I'd ever been shown options for handling conflicts other than attacking hard to establish dominance quickly. And that, in turn, helped me start unpacking the toxic masculine thought patterns I had been carrying around my whole life. Now let me be clear, I am not saying here that martial arts is some utopia where the problem of toxic masculinity has been solved. One look at MMA's current culture of trash talk and performative violence will show you that is obviously not true. And I still have toxic masculine tendencies to wrestle with, probably will for the rest of my life. But it is possible to approach and teach fighting as simply a neutral set of tools, useful for both personal development and self-defense. The best teachers approach it this way, even if they're teaching MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Muay Thai or some other aggressive system favored in the UFC. And they will be quick to rein in the ego-driven fighters who are looking to prove a point in the sparring circle. Now, I am not an expert or any kind of master, and I wouldn't presume to tell any of you what to do. I can only share my anecdote with you, along with my belief that knowing how to handle yourself in a fight makes it easier to be humane and centered, to feel confident when speaking uncomfortable truths, or to be gracious and empathetic when receiving them. In case it isn't clear, I'll spell it out for you. I do think the UFC specifically, and MMA culture generally, is deeply toxic and violent. But like I said, it's not the fighting that makes it either of those things. The culture of trash talk and performative violence so dominant in MMA today stems not from the sport's emphasis on fighting, but from the material conditions under which professional fighters are more or less forced to work. You see, the UFC classifies its fighters as independent contractors, rather than as employees. This means that it isn't legally liable for payroll taxes, healthcare insurance, or workers' compensation. Yet, in an effort to have things both ways, UFC insists on controlling where, when, and how fighters work. They decide who fighters will fight. They impose restrictions on what fighters can wear, how much promotion and what kind of promotion they can do. And they mandate drug testing. This situation means that UFC and its boss, Dana White, who is not coincidentally a major Donald Trump supporter, can make billions in revenue off the backs of fighters who, on average, are paid peanuts in comparison. It means fighters have to cover their own health expenses, and that many times they will fight while injured because they have to keep working just so they can afford health care for themselves and their families. And because UFC exercises so much control over who can fight who and when, professional fighters have to wait for UFC to match them with one another before they can work. And one of the best ways to get UFC to set up a match is to start talking shit about another fighter on social media. Even if you are not an abusive, bullying shit talker like Conor McGregor, even if you are someone like Khabib Nurmagomedov who wants to approach MMA as a sport that celebrates skill and discipline in a spirit of mutual respect. UFC incentivizes you to fabricate rivalries that could escalate to real-world violence, and it will then use that violence to promote its events while pretending to think it's all unbecoming. And while UFC as an institution carries a lot of responsibility for this, the fans are not blameless either. Many fans enjoy the trash-talking and bullying aspects of MMA more than they like the actual fights. And the more UFC promotes this toxicity, the more it incentivizes fighters to bully each other in the media, then the more toxic and bullying fans it attracts. It's a nasty feedback loop that leaves a majority of MMA fighters desperate for work and fearful of retaliation from UFC if they try to defend their own human rights. Dana White and the UFC have so far been incredibly successful at breaking any attempt by its fighters to unionize. The latest effort, Project Spearhead, founded by UFC fighter Leslie Smith, will almost certainly fail to meet its February 12, 2019 deadline for collecting enough union cards to get the U.S. Labor Board to issue a ruling on their behalf as employees of UFC rather than independent contractors. That's because UFC retaliated against Smith by failing to renew her contracts and consigning her to free agent status. Project Spearhead was making progress on signing up fighters until that happened, and when it did happen, recruitment ground to a halt. Improving the material conditions under which MMA athletes work can go a long way towards cleaning up the toxic and violent aspects of their sport. And if you are someone, like me, who's a fan of combat sports but isn't down with the trash talk and the bullying, the toxic masculinity, or the labor exploitation that currently characterizes MMA, the best thing you can do is withdraw your financial support. Don't order pay-per-view events, or buy merchandise, or go see fights live. Engage with fighters on social media who are trying to unionize their sport, or who speak out against UFC's shady capitalist practices. And if you think you'd like to try it, get involved with a fighting sport of your own, and use it to promote positive gender roles in yourself and others. We are, all of us, stronger together than we are alone. And together, maybe we can get the bullies and the capitalists to tap out. So that's it for this month's Armchair Samurai. I hope that if you enjoy my content, you'll like, subscribe, hit the bell, share my videos, and all the rest. My next few Armchair Samurai videos will return to the fight versus fight format, so please stay tuned if you like what I'm doing with that. And in the meantime, remember that what is best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in intellectual discourse with the women.